because I heard the same suggestion that you did, and it says on or about the 11th day of February 2019.
Blame Selden, he came up with
Go
that.
ahead. Just the point I brought up, and it's probably too late to address it. The murder says February 11th. The alleged act occurred on February 6th. That's when the alleged act occurred. The death of Cochran occurred on February 11th. I don't know what we can do about it or anything of that nature.
It's on or about. There's nothing to do about it.
I don't think there is anything we can. Oh, we didn't have a court reporter.
Well,
Uh-oh.
I thought you were down there, Joanne. I'm sorry.
no, you didn't do anything wrong.
You didn't do anything wrong.
Well, go ahead.
All right, I think we can go forward. We can change the instructions, and I can read them all over again, but everybody's moaning and groaning, and nobody wants to hear that.
With a big sign that says, "This is Selden's fault."
Right.
Just for the sake of the record, I brought to the court's attention the indictment says that the murder occurred on or about February 11th. I just brought to the attention of the court the alleged act occurred on February 6th. The passing of the deceased occurred on February 11th. I don't know how that impacts anything.
I don't think it impacts anything. It's on or about. No objection was raised. You all approved the jury charge, and we're going forward.
Thank you.
All right, are you folks ready to deliver your closing remarks?
Yes, Your Honor.
Bring in the jury, please.
You'd think. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as I have alluded to, the next stage or part of this case is the final argument of counsel. You will hear from each side, and the attorneys will argue the issues and the evidence presented, giving you their own interpretation of that evidence. As I've said over and over, their remarks would not be evidence themselves, but all of these attorneys have worked very hard in presenting this case before you, and I ask you to please give them due consideration. We will follow the same order that we have established in this case. As you know, the state does have the burden of proof, and will go forward first. Then the defense will present their entire argument, and the state has a brief period to rebut. All right, Ms. Akard, you may proceed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. As you know by now, my name is Ashley Akard. I am an assistant prosecuting attorney here in Raleigh County. I've been presenting this case to you with Tom Truman, who is our current prosecuting attorney. We're here in the matter of State of West Virginia versus Natalie Cochran. And if you all will bear with me, I will have to do some reading as we go. There's a lot of ground to cover here. So the first thing I want to do is thank you for being here. Just very briefly, I know everyone does this, but this has been a long couple of weeks, and we've had a lot of evidence come in this case. So just thank you all for sitting through it with us. Thank you for being here, and thank you for deciding this case. Now, at this point, you all know why we're here and what we've been doing for the last few weeks. My job today is to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that this woman, Natalie Cochran, feloniously, willfully, maliciously, deliberately, and with premeditation killed her husband, Michael Cochran. This entire tragedy can be summarized into 3 different blocks of time. September 29th of 2017 through August 26th of 2018, September 1st of 2018 through January 30th of 2019, and January 30th of 2019 through February 6th of 2019, the week that Michael falls ill for the last time. Now, Michael Cochran was 38 years old at the time that he died. He was a father, a husband, and a son. He was a very fit and healthy man. He cared a lot about what he looked like and a lot about what people thought of him. He lived and worked here in Raleigh County. As you've heard, he worked in technology. He also worked with Workforce West Virginia. Ultimately, he was a minority partner in the Business Tactical Solutions Group, in which his wife, Natalie Cochran, was the 51% majority owner. And we'll just briefly talk about TSG. We don't have to get too far into it, but I feel like we need to cover that ground again. TSG is represented through its website to be a leading supplier to the Department of Defense, national security agencies, federal civilian agencies, prime contractors, and nonprofits worldwide. And we've heard a lot about how the business ended up not being super legitimate. In fact, it wasn't at all. But it originally was set up that way. They had filed with the Secretary of State, it had a business license, and it actually was registered with the federal government to bid on government contracts and to be awarded those contracts. It was held out to be a woman-owned small business, which gave it priority in getting contracts. But a business like this required one thing: startup capital. There was 2 ways that the business obtained startup capital, and that's the money that's needed to get it off the ground and get things running in general. The first way was through investors. And what would happen was Natalie would go to her friends, her family, people in the community, ask them to invest in this company. They were promised a return on their investments when contracts were ultimately fulfilled. They'd get more money back than what they put in. And sometimes, when the money would come back, she would ask them to invest again so they could get an even higher return on their original investment. So some of these people were putting money into this company over and over and over again and seeing very little payout, if any. The other way that TSG gained startup capital was through loans. She would apply for small business quick capital loans. And what that means is these were rescue loans. These were for companies that were in trouble. They would have a very high interest rate, and you would have to pay back on them daily. And now, I'm not saying that Michael didn't know about investors and didn't know about loans. He knew people were investing. He knew there were loans. But they weren't what he thought they were. Some of the loans, he was told, were SBA grants. What's so special about a grant is that you don't have to pay the money back. That money is given to you for a specific purpose. Otherwise, he thought they were getting government bonds. Specifically, Natalie held out the loan companies to be factoring companies. And what factoring companies do is they buy all of these accounts receivable that you have, and they'll pay you for a portion of them, and then they'll collect the money later. So that's what she told him was going on. So what happens next is about August 26th of 2018, Michael really discovers the extent of family investors and investments. You heard that he got into Natalie's phone at one point and read her messages, and that's how he found out. He was completely unaware of the lucrative returns and profits that were being promised to people. He was quoted as saying she was giving away our money. On August 27th of 2018, Natalie sent a message to a few family members, which we've put in evidence and you all have seen. Hey guys, after the contracts that are out pay off, I will have to stop subcontracting. I wasn't as transparent with Michael as I should have been. After this, Michael and Natalie made rounds to family members, trying to pay some checks, trying to pay some people back. But ultimately, Michael realizes that the amount of money that they owed people is a lot more than he knew. So now he wants to be more involved and understand how everything works. On August 27th of 2018, Natalie sends Michael this message, this series of messages. 3.45 million should post tonight at midnight. 300,000 should post Wednesday. 1.25 million on Thursday. 724,000 Monday of next week, and 2.56 million next Friday. You've heard that Michael was spending money. This is why. This is why he was so charitable. You heard that he donated a weight room to a middle school. He bought uniforms for youth sports. He bought a house for a youth pastor who had nowhere else to go, and later rented that house out to Chris Davis's recently widowed aunt. He was trying to give to people. And he'd been led to believe that this legitimate business was thriving and all of this money was due to them. She set a prize date, though, when she did this. All their hard work was going to start paying off at midnight. So what did this ultimately do? It created a big problem. It created a bunch of promises that Natalie couldn't fulfill. And those promises totaled, at this time, $247,499,232. So in our next time frame, Natalie starts to claim that the government is conducting an audit of TSG. And she uses this as a reason that they can't pay money to investors, a reason they can't get contracts, they can't get paid on outstanding contracts, and the reason that they're not seeing any returns. So she solicits 2 more investors. One of those was Chris Davis. He told you about that. She obtains 3 more rescue loans. On October 25th, Natalie tells Michael the audit is complete. We're going to have our money October 29th. So what happens right around that time? October 31st, Michael goes to the hospital. He's expecting $248 million on October 29th. The money isn't produced. On October 31st, he's sick. He goes to the hospital, and he gets discharged, but he's not well. He's not better. And the defense would have you believe that Michael was incredibly sick all the time, that he left the hospital, went back to the hospital because he got sick all over again. No. He was sick one time. He just didn't get better. It happens. It happens all the time, all over the world. When Michael went back to the hospital on November 2nd, Natalie reported that he had had a seizure. That was never confirmed. You heard experts testify that the seizure activity in the records was reported by the defendant. Everyone else who testified said they had never seen him have a seizure. At that time, he had his friend Chris Davis take him to the hospital because he wanted to be treated. Nobody wants to feel the way that Michael felt. But other than this, he was healthy. You would think that he was sick, though, because he was stressed out of his mind, because he was waiting for $248 million that had been promised to him that he hasn't seen. But it still isn't coming, and there's a whole lot happening during this time. A phrase that we've been throwing around a lot on our team is that Natalie Cochran involved everyone and included no one. So on December 4th, BB&T is closing the Cochrans' accounts. Michael goes to BB&T, and you've heard about that. He is irate. In fact, his friend Chris Davis is called to come down to the bank because Michael is causing such a scene that there is fear the police are going to be called. He's angry because he thinks these accounts closing is why he's not seeing any money. So ask yourselves, if Michael was involved in a felony-level financial crime involving hundreds of thousands, at this point hundreds of millions of dollars, why would he go cause a scene at a bank and potentially get the police called on him? He didn't know what was going on. And this is where Natalie gets lucky for the first time. On December 6th, the government's already partially shut down and is only funding certain departments. Now, I'm sure we all remember the government shutdown because it was a really big deal and a lot of people had a really hard time because of it. On December 22nd, the entire federal government shuts down. So we've gone from an audit to a federal government shutdown, buying her more and more time. And the shutdown becomes the reason that they're not getting paid. Now, Natalie has told Michael and all the investors that the money's frozen because of an audit. Now, the government's shut down. Next, she tells people she has cancer, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which we talked about that a little. We've never found anything that indicates that that was real either. She now has to deliver. So she tells Michael and she tells the investors, on February 1st, the federal funds will be released because the shutdown has ended. So why does the money come in on February 1st? It's January 30th of 2019, and we have entered the week of Michael's illness and ultimate death. So here is where she gets sloppy. Her motive to kill him becomes very clear because he is very quickly catching on. It becomes very obvious who's been running the company, that Michael has no idea about the Ponzi scheme, and more importantly, we're seeing that Michael's about to discover the truth of everything that's been going on. So she has two choices. She can come clean, or she can go into self-preservation, which requires that she take him out of the equation and make sure he never finds out what was happening. January 31st of 2019. Natalie says, I'm on the phone with Bank of America. Michael says, are we 1,000%? Yes, she's sending them with tracking. Money is supposed to hit tomorrow. February 1st of 2019, the fund release date told to investors and told to Michael, no funds hit any accounts. This was a Friday, so Michael knows at this point Monday is the next day he can do anything. So, on Monday, money isn't in there. More excuses. Michael is getting increasingly concerned. Later that same day, she says that she spoke with the wire department. All of this money is about to come through. $4.8 million in the morning, $23.8 tomorrow sometime. Michael says, shit, can't do anything today. Michael was just like the rest of us, as you can see. Doesn't make any sense. I certainly don't think it makes any sense, ladies and gentlemen. And that's because nothing he was told was true. So let's get into Michael's murder. February 4th of 2019, Natalie sends Michael a text message. I'm at the pharmacy. Need anything? Now, if you'll recall from Dr. Halsey's testimony yesterday, on February 4th of 2019, Natalie was picking up her prescription for Xanax, which Dr. Halsey also testified is a benzodiazepine. Michael is allergic to benzodiazepines, as you've all heard. On February 5th of 2019, Natalie goes to Access Health and sees Dr. Halsey with flu-like symptoms. She says she's vomiting, she reports a fever. She's negative for the flu and strep. She got a steroid shot and labs that day. Now you'll note that this is the doctor who, she said, put her on such a high dose of steroids. That was her words, high dose of steroids. As we'll later see her tell Jennifer Davis. But he didn't give her a prescription for insulin. And you heard his testimony yesterday that he didn't instruct her to get insulin. On this day, she also requested methylprednisolone from Stephanie Hamilton. Now, we all know that is Solumedrol. And if you'll recall, a vial of methylprednisolone was later recovered from the Cochran residence when the search warrant was executed. FBI analysis told us that that bottle had never been used. The same day, Natalie reaches out to Albatross Air, the Kearns family, and schedules a flight for her and Mike to take the following day to Lynchburg, Virginia. We've heard a lot of talk about that flight. You heard from Court Nexon, who is a former Bank of America employee. And he told you that the Cochran's account was never funded. There was never money in their Bank of America account. Mike couldn't understand why. So sure, they were going on this trip to fill out signature cards and things like that. But they were also going to find out why contract funds weren't posting to this account. Why all of these wire transfers we've heard of were not coming through. And if they went on that trip, it would have changed everything. So on February 6th of 2019, the last day that anyone sees Michael Cochran conscious, 6:34 a.m., Natalie Cochran texts Chris Davis. She tells him she can't go to Lynchburg because she has a fever of 103 degrees. Now you'll recall she asked Stephanie Hamilton to bring a thermometer over because she apparently didn't have one. 6:35 a.m., Natalie texts Josh Kearns at Albatross Air, cancels the flight to Lynchburg because she has the flu. Mike tells Natalie to tell Court Nexon and his boss that they won't be there today because she's sick and they'll come tomorrow. But if they still need him to come today, Mike will go and he'll take his friend Chris Davis with him. They'll come back and get her signature card notarized. Mike very much wanted to take this trip. 6:37 a.m., Mike tells Natalie to get Court Nexon to wire them $5,000 to $10,000 from their account. The account that is still sitting empty at Bank of America. Natalie tells Mike she's already canceled the flight and he tells her to reschedule it for the next day. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the text canceling the flight to Lynchburg, wherein Natalie says that she's been up all night with the flu, which we all know she was never diagnosed with. Later on February 6th, she sends this text message to Michael. I'm in the doctor's office getting swabbed again, getting a Prometh shot, getting you and I both meds. Now Mike is currently out and about in town. He goes and gets some Starbucks at 8:37 in the morning. Natalie arrives at Access Health at 8:10. And she says she's getting them both meds. Now, you heard Dr. Halsey testify yesterday. He didn't see Michael that day, and he did not prescribe anything for Michael that day. In fact, the only medications that Natalie was prescribed that day were promethazine tablets. Promethazine, which Michael is critically allergic to. So what did she tell him that she got him? And isn't it interesting that Natalie Cochran runs straight to the doctor at the first sign of trouble? Frequently. But let Michael Cochran lay on the couch for 6 hours, unconscious. And let's ask ourselves how Michael was feeling around this time. Well, you remember Jason Bowen telling you he, quote, felt like he was being poisoned. She later texts Jennifer Davis, we are both sick. So they put me on such high-dose steroids, I have to start taking small insulin shots. Gonna have to order a vial. Again, there's no records that support any of this. There's nothing that indicates that she needed insulin for any reason at all. And if Mike was really keeping insulin in the house for his bodybuilding that everyone keeps talking about, why couldn't she use that? Why would she need to get it somewhere else? And I'll also add, the last text between Michael and Natalie Cochran is at 8:51 a.m. on February 6th. Following that was a 15-second call at 8:52 a.m. And this is the last time we know of that they spoke with each other. Later on, as we all know, Jennifer Davis offers up a vial of insulin because she's a good friend. She's worried about Natalie. She thinks her friend has cancer. She thinks that she's dying. She's doing everything she can to help. So she offers up her own son's vial of insulin. Natalie sends another text to Jennifer Davis. Mike's sick today too. He didn't get anything prescribed for him. He didn't go to the doctor. All that we've heard is that he laid on the couch for a couple hours. Chris Davis shows up a little while later, and as we all know, drops off a bag, which he testified that he never looked in. His wife, Jennifer, told us exactly what was in the bag. Some Propel, a Diet Coke that Natalie asked for, and a brand new, unopened vial of Humalog insulin. Jennifer says, "You're welcome, but that's nothing. I sure wish I could do more for you." And Natalie's words are, "That was perfect." And I bet it was. Another message she sends Jennifer Davis. Mike was so mad this AM about not being able to go today, he had to take 2 of my blood pressure pills. Now, the last documented communications from Mike's phone, 11:15 a.m., John Hamilton told you he called and didn't get Mike. He leaves a voicemail message. 1:39 p.m., which you heard testimony today, we believe Michael was unconscious at that time. A text goes from Michael's phone to Matt McCormick. "Should be good, buddy. I'm available all weekend, too. Whatever works best." "12:29 on February 6th of 2019, Natalie Cochran takes this photo of her husband, Michael, laying in their kitchen floor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but if my husband had a serious medical event and was lying unconscious in my kitchen floor, I wouldn't be taking pictures of him. I'd be getting help. The first person she sends it to is her sister Penny, who testified that her reaction was, "Well, what does she want me to do about it?" And I think we all know the answer to that question. Next, she reaches out to John Hamilton, who you heard testify a few days ago. She tells him, "Mike is sick like last time. Last time when he asked to be taken to the hospital. Last time when he wasn't left unconscious in his kitchen floor." John heads that way, and Natalie then calls her private contractors, Jason Bowen and Jonathan Miller, to come to the residence and help. You heard Jason testify that they were at Lowe's at the time. The story he was given was that Michael threw up in the sink and then used the kitchen cabinets to lower himself to the floor. Jason and Jonathan arrive, and they move Michael to the couch, and Natalie begins reading them vital signs that they can't see. That includes his blood sugar. Why would you check the blood sugar of someone who doesn't have diabetes or any known problems with regulating his blood sugar? Ladies and gentlemen, I'll posit to you that if he were just sleeping it off like she wanted him to do, he would have felt that finger stick. I've had 100 finger sticks. I know what they feel like. You're not going to sleep through that. At that point, she reports that his blood glucose is 145, and this is at 1:06 p.m. John Hamilton shows up shortly after that, maybe 20 minutes after she contacted him the first time. He told you that Michael was already laying on the couch when he got there. He immediately asks, "How are we going to get Michael to the hospital?" Natalie's response is to let him sleep it off. She now tells him that Michael was sick and had a seizure. John noted that he had never seen Michael have a seizure. John then contacts his wife, Stephanie, who is a physician assistant, as you all heard. He asks her to come over and, quote, get her to take him to the hospital. So Stephanie arrives a little later and takes Michael's temperature. She made it a point not to startle him and even warned him that she was going to be taking his temperature. But he doesn't wake up. Stephanie also tells Natalie that Michael needs to be evaluated. Natalie again declines and says Michael wouldn't want to wake up in a hospital. Stephanie even gave her an out. She said, he can blame me. Also, at some point during the day, Natalie and Mike's kids come home from school, and Natalie's sister, Penny Lowry, arrives. Penny told you that Michael had an accident, and she held a blanket up while Natalie changed him into dry clothing that was retrieved by Natalie and Michael's daughter, Nicole. Thomas Treadway shows up later. When asked if he believed Michael needed to go to the hospital, he told you he's not a medical professional. Natalie's text messages indicate otherwise. They indicate that he believed Michael was getting worse and that he needed to be checked out. So you decide. At 4:34 p.m., Natalie reports that Michael's blood glucose is 115. Now, she tells others that Stephanie Hamilton took that reading, but Stephanie Hamilton took the stand and told you that was not true. Lastly, Chris Davis, Michael's best friend by all accounts, arrives at the residence. He told you how he ran his thumb up the sole of Michael's foot to see if he could startle him awake. He told you that he tried a sternal rub. Nothing. His words to you were, he is going to the hospital, and I'm going to take him. At that point, he and Thomas Treadway load Michael into the back of the Cochran's car, where Natalie rides with him as Chris drives him from 4H Lake Road to Raleigh General Hospital. When Michael arrives at Raleigh General Hospital, his blood glucose was 21. That's a far cry from 145 and 115. Seemingly, it's plummeted out of nowhere. You heard from Dr. Uribe and Dr. Krieger. The only reasonable explanation is exogenous insulin administration. And ladies and gentlemen, the defense has posited to you that if Natalie Cochran injected Michael with insulin, whoops, dropped the needle. Here's the good news, I brought it back up. He would have felt it. Now, this is an insulin needle.
Yeah, I'm going to object to this demonstration. This is bringing outside the evidence before the jury.
This is a demonstrative exhibit, Your Honor.
Overall, it is a demonstrative exhibit used in closing arguments. Members of the jury, you are the judges of the evidence. This is a demonstrative exhibit. I want you to rely upon your recollections and your memories of what the evidence has been in making your decision. There's a certain rough and tumble that we allow and some latitude in terms of closing remarks. I'm going to, as I say, overrule the objection and permit counsel to proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to see the size of an insulin needle. That needle I just showed you holds 30 units of the kind of insulin that Gavin Davis was prescribed and that was received by Natalie Cochran from Jennifer Davis. Dr. Krieger told you how small a unit of insulin is, and you can see it for yourself. Extremely small. I would also say, we made it pretty clear yesterday that the defense experts did not have the full picture. They had incorrect and incomplete information, so how could they make an informed opinion? And when Michael arrived at Raleigh General, as I said, his blood glucose was 21. He was immediately intubated, and he never woke up. February 7th through 11th of 2019, Michael was transferred to Charleston Area Medical Center, CAMC. His MRI there, as you've heard, showed diffuse hypoglycemic encephalopathy, brain swelling caused by low blood sugar. February 10th of 2019, Michael was transferred to hospice care at his wife's request. He spends 5 hours there before he dies. Now, you'll recall during Thomas Treadway's testimony that he advised Natalie needed to remember that she took his vitals that day, and that she needed to make a timeline of the events leading up to Michael's death. Why? Here's some of the different stories she told. Michael was sick in the sink and fell. Michael was sick in the sink and lowered himself to the floor. I heard him hit his head, and when I went in there, he had fallen. She also said he was vomiting in the sink, had a seizure, and then hit his head. And that's just a few of the stories we heard. Now, a search warrant of the Cochran residence was executed on June 25th of 2019. And I would note that TSG has continued business up to this point, even getting additional investors after Michael's death, including the Hamiltons. During this time frame, Natalie also pled guilty to the charges that you heard about in federal court, the wire fraud and unlawful monetary transactions. During the execution of that search warrant, a lot of things were found and taken from the Cochran residence. Of note for us was the unopened methylprednisolone vial and the insulin that she kept in her refrigerator. Now, if you remember when Lieutenant Bledsoe testified, he told you that when he reviewed the property receipt from the search warrant with Natalie Cochran, she flipped through it and immediately went to the insulin. And she said, "I keep that for my neighbor's son who has diabetes." Ladies and gentlemen, as I stated previously, the elements of first-degree murder are a felonious, willful, malicious, deliberate, and premeditated killing. Felonious is simple. Murder is a felony, and it's against the laws of the state of West Virginia. Willful or deliberate would mean that someone took an overt action in furtherance of an anticipated. Dr. Krieger and Dr. Uribe testified that there was no alternative, reasonable explanation for Michael's blood sugar to be 21 other than outside insulin administration. She also let him lay on the couch for 6 hours. She brought in all this help over and over just to refuse it. Malicious, showing or having a desire to cause harm. Natalie was a diabetic counselor and a pharmacist. She knew that injecting insulin into a non-diabetic would cause harm. She chose over and over, after repeated pleas from friends and loved ones, to leave Michael on the couch, laying in his own urine. She also showed a complete indifference for human life when she continued to work on contracts and make plans for bingo while her husband lay dying in the hospital. Premeditation. She obtained the murder weapon in advance from Jennifer Davis. And poor Jennifer had no idea what she was getting herself into when she did that. She had a clear motive, and you saw that leading up to this date, Michael was about to find out what she was doing to people. Do we know what he was going to do with that information? We never will, because he won't have the chance to tell us. Michael was killed because following the actions of the defendant, he was admitted to multiple hospitals and ultimately passed away at hospice. Well, there's a couple of defense theories that I just want to go ahead and debunk while we're here. The first being, Natalie was a pharmacist and could have gotten undetectable drugs to kill Michael. Those were defense counsel's words. She did, just not as a pharmacist. She hadn't worked in pharmacy for 2 years at that point. Insulin can be bought over the counter. Stephanie Hamilton debunked this one. She testified that Humalog, the kind of insulin that was used to kill Michael, cannot be bought over the counter and has to be obtained via a prescription, which neither Natalie nor Michael had. Michael was a, quote, ticking time bomb. Michael's previous illnesses can only be verified by Natalie. No one else ever saw him have a seizure. Sure, he went to the hospital, but they were never actually able to verify that seizure activity occurred, only that it was reported at home. By her own words, Mike was doing the best he had ever done in his life. You heard testimony that he forgot where he parked his car. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I forget where I park my car all the time. It's very common. He participated in tough man competitions and Jeep pulling competitions. That doesn't sound like a sick man to me. You also heard that Michael was on steroids. Chris Davis testified that Natalie told him that she was in charge of all of his supplements and vitamins. No steroids were recovered from the Cochran residence when the search warrant was executed. The Mexican supplement that we've heard about turned out to be a female fertility drug that came from Florida. You know who had communication with that company? Natalie Cochran. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, Natalie Cochran had the means, knowledge, and opportunity to commit this crime. She dosed Michael Cochran with insulin that he was not prescribed and that he did not need. You may not have done the math, but I have. Next Thursday will make 6 years to the day since she injected Michael Cochran with insulin in his home. 5 days after that will be 6 years since Michael Cochran left this earth. 6 years since 2 children lost their father. 6 years since this woman, Donna Bolt, and this man, Ed Bolt, lost their son. 6 years since they were able to see him for the last time. Michael and the people that loved him deserve to have the most thorough investigation that we could conduct. And we've done that. We've done everything we could to show you what really happened to Michael. These people have waited long enough for justice. Michael has waited long enough for justice. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you at this time to deliver that justice and to find his wife, Natalie Cochran, guilty of the first-degree murder of Michael Cochran. Thank you.